In the middle of a high-class dinner, she ran straight to a man everyone feared, yet the moment she grabbed his arm, everything changed. Her makeup-stained tears told a story no one else dared to speak. And what the so-called Mafia boss did next silenced the entire room. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? A soft September morning settled gently over Asheville, the kind of morning that invited slow breaths and quiet reflection. Everett Cole stood by the wide kitchen window, a mug of black coffee warming his hands. From here, he could see the early sunlight brushing the tops of the blue-gray mountains that framed the city. Most people found comfort in that view. Everett once did too before the busy years blurred together and left him feeling like a guest in his own life. He took a sip, set the mug down, and straightened the small stack of mail on the counter. Everything in his house was tidy, deliberate, arranged with the kind of precision that filled the spaces where companionship used to be. At 56, Everett had built a reputation as a man who solved problems, made decisions, and kept feelings in neat boxes no one could open, not even himself. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Caleb Turner, his patient and endlessly dependable assistant. "Board meeting notes are ready. Want them printed or digital?" Everett typed back a quick reply and slipped the phone into his pocket. Work was simple, predictable. It didn't ask for more than he was willing to give. He slipped on his jacket, locked the door behind him, and headed to the car. The neighborhood was still half asleep. A jogger passed by with a friendly wave, and farther down the street, a woman clipped a leash onto a golden retriever. Small, ordinary scenes. Ones Everett viewed like a man watching life through a window. The drive into town followed a familiar rhythm. Sunlight filtered through the trees lining the road, painting soft patterns across the dashboard. Asheville's mix of old brick buildings and new storefronts came into view as he eased toward the office tower where he spent most of his days. Inside the quiet lobby, Everett greeted the morning receptionist with his usual nod, polite but distant. On the elevator ride up, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the metal doors. A composed man, well put together, successful by any reasonable standard. Yet the eyes looking back at him carried a tiredness he rarely acknowledged. His office sat on the 12th floor, with broad windows overlooking the city. Caleb was already waiting by the desk, tablet in hand, a hopeful smile in place. Everett offered a brief word of thanks, then settled into his chair, ready to begin the day's routine. But something felt off. Restlessness edged around the corners of his thoughts, a sense he couldn't quite name. Numbers and documents blurred. He found himself staring out the window more often than working, watching the people below move through the morning with an ease he had never fully mastered. During lunch, he stepped outside and took a slow walk through Pack Square. A father was lifting his little girl no more than 6 into the air, her laughter ringing across the park like wind chimes. Everett paused, unexpectedly struck by the simple tenderness of the scene. He didn't linger long, but the image stayed with him as he returned to the office. By the late afternoon, the unease had grown stronger. It wasn't unpleasant, just persistent, like something in his life had shifted a fraction of an inch, and he hadn't yet figured out what it meant. When he finally drove home, the sun was dipping behind the hills, leaving a gentle amber glow across the sky. Everett parked the car, stepped inside, and was met once more by the familiar quiet of his house. He set his keys down and exhaled slowly. The day had been ordinary, yet he felt anything but. Something was coming, something he could sense but not see. And it wouldn't be long before a 7-year-old girl would appear at his door, carrying a plea strong enough to break open the years he had spent living behind well-built walls. Evening unfolded gently around the quiet edges of Asheville as Everett stepped into his home. The place greeted him the same way it always did, with soft stillness. Everything neatly arranged, everything exactly where he had left it. He loosened his tie, set his jacket over a chair, and walked to the kitchen where the dim under-cabinet lights cast a warm glow across the counters. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned back against the sink, letting the silence settle. Most nights, silence felt like a companion. Tonight, it felt more like a reminder of a house built for more than one person, of conversations never started, of memories filed away too carefully. He wandered into the living room and clicked on the small vintage radio near the shelf. Soft jazz drifted through the room, warm and low, filling the space without demanding anything from him. Everett lowered himself into the leather armchair, the one piece of furniture that had molded itself to his shape over the years. He rested his head back and closed his eyes for a moment. His thoughts drifted, not toward work as they usually did, but toward the scene he had witnessed earlier, the father lifting his daughter toward the sky, sunlight catching her hair as she laughed. Everett tried to push away the echo of that moment. It lingered anyway. He rose from the chair and walked down the hall toward the guest room. He hadn't stepped inside in months. The air smelled faintly of lavender from an old sachet in the closet. The room was neat, untouched bed, perfectly made. Curtains drawn just enough to let in the last traces of twilight. He straightened a picture frame on the dresser, then paused, wondering why the room felt heavier tonight than it usually did. Back in the living room, the radio continued its easy melody. Everett turned it off, and the quiet settled once more. He moved through his nightly routine with habitual precision, washing up, setting clothes aside for the morning, placing a book on the nightstand he knew he wouldn't read. When he finally lay down, the house seemed to sigh with him. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the distant refrigerator and the soft tick of the hallway clock. He felt an ache he couldn't quite name, a sense of life shifting in subtle ways he wasn't prepared for. He closed his eyes. Across town, Grace Hart was turning the key in the lock of her small flower shop. The last of the day's bouquets sat wrapped and ready for morning pickups. Her daughter, Lily, clutched her school books and leaned gently against her mother's side as they stepped into the cool night air. Grace offered her a tired smile, brushing a loose curl from the girl's forehead. Lily smiled back, unaware of how much strength her mother had spent simply to keep the shop running. They walked the short path home together, two silhouettes forming one shared rhythm. Grace's hand tightened around Lily's just a little more than usual. Later that night, Lily whispered a soft goodnight and drifted to sleep quickly, the way children do when they trust the world around them. Grace lingered by her bedside for a long moment, watching her breathe. Then she stepped quietly into the living room, sinking into a worn armchair much like Everett's one that had carried her through years of quiet battle. She pressed a hand to her forehead, exhaustion pulling at her body. A sharp, familiar pain pulsed behind her ribs, then eased. She exhaled slowly, willing her heart to steady. Neither she nor Everett knew that by this time tomorrow, their paths would begin to cross. Far from downtown Asheville, in a quiet house lit only by the thin glow of moonlight through the blinds, Everett finally drifted toward sleep. His breath softened, his thoughts loosened, and the weight of the day slipped from his shoulders. But beyond the stillness of his home, the world had already begun setting pieces in motion. Small, quiet pieces shaped by a little girl's courage, a mother's strength, and a man who had spent too many years believing he didn't need anyone. By morning, the first thread between their lives would be pulled. Something was coming. Something that would change everything he thought he understood about family, responsibility, and the quiet ache of living life alone. Tomorrow would begin a story Everett Cole had never imagined becoming part of. Morning light crept gently across Everett's bedroom, brushing the edges of the curtains with a soft golden hue. He woke earlier than usual, long before his alarm, the remnants of uneasy dreams fading as he sat up and rubbed his eyes. The house was still wrapped in a quiet calm, but something in him felt unsettled, like the day was holding its breath. He dressed slowly, choosing a charcoal sweater instead of his usual crisp shirt. The cooler air outside seemed to call for something more comfortable. In the kitchen, the coffee machine hummed to life, filling the room with a familiar scent. Everett leaned against the counter, watching the steam curl upward. He wasn't sure why the morning felt different, only that it did. After his first sip of coffee, he stepped outside onto the porch. A gentle breeze rolled across the street, carrying the smell of early autumn dry leaves, faint wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace, and the earthy scent of damp soil. A few houses down, Mrs. Hutchins was sweeping her walkway, and she greeted Everett with a warm wave. He lifted a hand in return, offering a polite smile. He glanced at his watch. He had time before heading to the office, more than enough to take a small detour. Without thinking too much about it, he locked the door behind him and got into the car. Instead of turning toward downtown Asheville, he steered onto a quieter road lined with tall maples beginning to shift into shades of amber and rust. He wasn't entirely sure where he was headed until he saw the small wooden sign, French Broad River Overlook, a place he hadn't visited in years. Parking the car, Everett stepped out and followed the narrow trail toward the overlook. The river glimmered below, moving steadily between rocks polished smooth by time. He rested his hands on the wooden railing and studied the flow of water. The quiet hum of nature wrapped around him, birds calling, leaves rustling, the steady rush of the river. He tried to understand the restlessness that had taken root in him. It wasn't discomfort exactly, more like a hint of something awakening, something nudging him to pay attention. He took a slow breath, letting it fill his chest. His phone buzzed. Everett hesitated before pulling it from his pocket. A message from Caleb again. Reminder meeting with the finance team at 10. Need anything prepared? Everett replied with a simple, I'll be there. Caleb meant well. He always did. But Everett closed the message, feeling more distant from his work than he had in years. He looked once more at the river before heading back to the car. On the drive into town, Asheville was beginning to stir awake. A school bus rumbled past, children's voices rising in cheerful bursts. A cyclist waved as he passed Everett's lane. The bakery on the corner had already opened, its windows fogged with warmth, the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls drifting into the street. By the time Everett reached the office, the restlessness inside him had grown into something firmer, something that made him pause before stepping out of the car. He sat a moment longer, hands resting on the steering wheel, an unexpected question nudging its way into his mind. Is this all there is? He pushed the thought aside and exited the car, smoothing his sweater as he walked into the building. The elevator chimed softly on the 12th floor. Caleb stood by his desk, organized as always, offering a friendly morning greeting. Everett nodded, though his mind was still far away. For the first time in a long time, the day ahead felt like a path he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to follow. And across town, Lily Hart was slipping her small hand into her mother's as they stepped out of their apartment. Grace's smile masked exhaustion, and Lily, with her bright eyes, sensed more than she understood. Their morning would unfold very differently, and soon their paths would begin moving toward Everett's in quiet, inevitable steps. Everett left the elevator and moved through the hallway with his usual steady stride, though today his thoughts drifted far behind him. Caleb followed with a gentle eagerness, handing him a folder filled with color-coded notes. I added the updated projections, Caleb said. Thought you might want a cleaner version for the meeting. Thank you, Everett replied, offering a small nod. You're always thorough. Caleb smiled at the compliment, a rare one from Everett, and stepped away to prepare the conference room. Everett watched him go, sensing again that faint distance between how he lived and how others seemed to move through their days. The building hummed with quiet activity, co-workers greeting each other with warm enthusiasm. It struck Everett how rarely he joined those conversations. He walked into his office and set the folder on his desk. The large windows framed Asheville like a postcard, traffic picking up, sunlight spilling across rooftops, the early haze beginning to lift. Yet he felt unsettled, as though a quiet responsibility had started forming inside him without explanation. He tried to work, reviewing documents and signing off on budget decisions. But every so often his gaze drifted to the window, watching ordinary people live ordinary moments, walking dogs, chatting over coffee, carrying grocery bags, holding hands. He noticed a mother guiding her daughter across the street, her protective hand steady on the girl's shoulder. The sight tugged at him the same way it had the day before. A knock pulled him out of his thoughts. Caleb peeked inside. They're ready for you. Everett straightened his sweater and followed him. The meeting went smoothly, predictable discussions, polite disagreements, revisions to plans already set in motion. But Everett felt detached from it all, like he was playing a role he had memorized long ago. When the board finally adjourned, Everett stepped outside for air. The midday sun warmed the sidewalk, and he took in a slow breath. A street musician played a quiet tune on the corner, gentle notes that drifted across the street like a breeze. Everett stopped for a moment, letting the melody settle into him. It reminded him of something he had forgotten, the sound of uncomplicated joy. He returned to his car later than planned. The drive home took him along familiar streets, past the grocery store, the old library, and the diner with the red awning that locals swore had the best pie in town. He almost stopped, almost walked inside for a slice and a moment of company, but the idea felt foreign, like it belonged to a different version of him. So he drove on. Back at home, Everett placed his keys on the entry table and looked around at the quiet space. The stillness wrapped around him again, but this time it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like distance between him and something he couldn't yet name. He moved through his evening routine, pouring a glass of water, turning on the lamp near the armchair, flipping through the pages of a book without really reading. Restlessness pressed against his ribs. He sat, then stood, then walked into the kitchen before returning to the living room again, unable to settle. Outside his window, the last of the daylight softened the sky into muted shades of lavender and gold. A single car passed down the street. The world seemed too calm for the heaviness he felt. On the other side of town, Lily Hart stood beside her mother outside the flower shop. Grace's face was pale beneath the warm shop lights, her smile thinner than usual. She placed a gentle hand on Lily's cheek and brushed away a stray curl. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Grace asked softly. Lily nodded, though she watched her mother closely, sensing something wasn't right. She slipped her hand into Grace's small fingers, curling with quiet determination as they began their walk home. Halfway down the block, Grace paused, her breath caught. The sidewalk wavered slightly beneath her feet. Lily tugged her sleeve. "Mom, are you okay?" Grace steadied herself with a weak smile. "Just tired, honey. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. And Lily, even at her young age, felt it deeply. Everett couldn't know that at that very moment, a little girl was looking up at her mother with growing worry that would soon push her toward the one man she had never met, but whose life she was destined to change. As the evening settled across Asheville, a quiet line connected them, fragile but certain. Everett felt the shift but didn't understand it yet. Lily felt the fear but didn't know where it would lead. By tomorrow, their paths would move toward each other with the force of something bigger than chance. Morning arrived quietly for most of Asheville, but for Lily Hart, it came with a knot of worry she couldn't shake. She sat at the small kitchen table, swinging her feet above the floor as she watched her mother move slowly around the room. Grace tried to hide her exhaustion, but the tremor in her hands and the pale cast of her skin made it impossible to ignore. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" Lily asked softly, tracing the rim of her cereal bowl with one finger. Grace turned, offering a gentle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a busy week, sweetheart. I'll be fine once I get to the shop." But Lily wasn't convinced. She had seen her mother push through tired days before, but this felt different, like something heavy was pressing against Grace from the inside. And though Lily was only 7, she understood more than adults often assumed. She followed Grace to the door, her backpack slung crookedly over one shoulder. The morning was cool and bright, with sunlight touching the tops of the buildings and catching in the dew on the grass. Grace locked their apartment door, pausing a moment, as if the simple act took more strength than it should have. Lily slipped her hand into her mother's. "I'll help at the shop today," she offered. "I can sweep, or make bows, or water the plants." Grace squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "You already help me more than you know." They walked the familiar path toward Heart and Petals, the flower shop Grace had built with quiet determination. The bell above the door chimed softly when they entered. The scent of fresh blooms rose like a gentle comfort. Roses, lilies, eucalyptus, and a hint of lavender. Grace set down her purse and turned on the lights, the shop glowing to life in warm, golden tones. But as she moved toward the counter, her breath hitched. She steadied herself on the edge of the table. Lily froze. "Mom?" Grace waved a hand dismissively. "Just stood up too fast." But Lily saw the truth. Her mother's shoulders were trembling. And she wasn't standing too fast, she was barely standing at all. Grace tried to continue with her routine, pulling invoices, arranging morning orders, but the room had begun to tilt. She grabbed the counter again, eyes losing focus. "Mom!" Lily cried, rushing forward. This time, Grace couldn't reassure her. Her knees buckled, and she sank toward the floor. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, trying desperately to hold her up. "Mom, stay with me," Lily whispered through her tears. Grace managed one faint breath. "It's okay, sweetheart." Then the world slipped from her grasp. Grace collapsed. The shop fell into a silence, so complete it rang in Lily's ears. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft rattle of the air vent, everything faded under the sound of her own frightened heartbeat. Lily knelt beside her mother, shaking her shoulder gently. "Mom? Mommy, please wake up." No answer. Tears blurred her vision, spilling onto her hands as she tried again and again to call her mother back. Panic swelled in her chest, too big, too heavy for a small child to carry. She needed help. She needed someone who would listen. Someone who wouldn't turn her away. Lily wiped her face with the back of her sleeve and stood on trembling legs. She grabbed her backpack, threw on her jacket, and bolted out the door. The bell above the shop chimed sharply behind her. She didn't know exactly where she was going. She only knew she had to find help fast. And across town, Everett Cole was finishing his second cup of coffee, unaware of the small storm about to sweep into his life. He stepped onto his porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. Something tugged at him again, that same restlessness that had followed him since yesterday. He couldn't explain it. He only knew the day felt different. As he locked the front door and headed to his car, Lily was already running, small feet pounding the sidewalk, heart racing, breath unsteady, searching for someone strong enough, kind enough, or simply willing enough to save the person she loved most in the world. And whether he knew it or not, Everett Cole was the one she was running toward. Lily ran as fast as her small legs could carry her, the cool morning air burning in her lungs. Tears blurred the edges of her vision, but she kept going past the bakery that always smelled like cinnamon, past the hardware store where the owner sometimes gave her little wooden scraps to paint, past familiar faces she didn't even see. Her jacket flapped behind her like a wing that couldn't quite lift her, but she didn't slow down. Every second felt like a minute, every street like a mile. All she knew was that her mother had collapsed, and anyone had to help. She reached the busier part of town, where people hurried along the sidewalks on their way to work. Lily approached a woman carrying a briefcase. "Please, my mom. She fell. She won't wake up. Please help." The woman froze, startled, then softened. "Sweetheart, slow down, slow down. Where is she?" But Lily was already overwhelmed. The woman's worried tone made her panic rise again. She backed away, shaking her head, words tangling in her throat. Before the woman could ask more, Lily bolted in the opposite direction. She needed someone stronger, someone who looked like they could fix things. She stopped at a crosswalk, chest heaving, trying to decide where to go next. Cars rolled by. The light changed. She crossed with hurried steps. At the same moment, Everett's car turned onto the same street. He didn't see her, not yet, but he did notice a small figure darting through the crowd. Something about the desperate movement tugged at him, though he couldn't place why. A flicker of concern passed through him, then faded as the car ahead braked and redirected his attention. Lily, meanwhile, kept scanning faces. She tugged at a man's sleeve, a tall man in a suit, but he shook her off without glancing down, lost in his phone call. Her eyes filled again. She kept running. At the next corner, she stopped again, lungs shaking. She leaned against a cold brick wall and wiped her face with her sleeve. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she pushed off the wall and forced herself forward. She needed help. She couldn't give up. Across town, Everett parked near a cafe he rarely visited. The restless feeling from the morning still clung to him, and he decided, without quite understanding why, that he needed a moment before heading into the office. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the cafe door. But just as he reached for the handle, a shadow of movement on the sidewalk caught his eye. A small girl, running, stumbling, then running again. Something in the way she kept glancing around tugged at a memory he couldn't quite form. He hesitated, watching her disappear around the corner. He considered going after her, just for a moment, just to make sure she was okay. But the cafe door chimed behind him, and he stepped inside, instead carried forward by habit, by old patterns he didn't yet realize were being tested. Meanwhile, Lily burst onto the next street and slowed. Her chest hurt. Her legs trembled. She pressed a hand against her ribs and took a shuddering breath. She spotted a police officer across the street. For a heartbeat, her face lit with hope, but then fear struck just as quickly. What if they didn't believe her? What if they couldn't get there fast enough? What if her mother needed someone right now? She stepped back onto the sidewalk and turned away. Her mind raced. Where should she go? Who would help? Her eyes landed on a tall building ahead, glass, clean lines, the kind of place where important people worked. Important people could fix things. Important people had answers. So she ran toward it. Inside the cafe, Everett stood in line without realizing he was staring out the window. his thoughts drifting again to the small figure he'd seen moments earlier. Something inside him whispered that he should step outside, look around, check if she needed help. But he stayed where he was, quiet, thoughtful, oblivious to the fact that she was running toward the very building he had just left minutes earlier. Lily crossed the street carefully, her breath shaky, her determination wavering but still intact. She approached the tall office tower, the door heavy and polished. She grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled it open. The lobby was busy and bright. People walked back and forth with papers and coffee cups, talking in low, hurried voices. Lily stood in the middle of the room, small and overwhelmed, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. A receptionist noticed her. "Sweetie, are you lost?" Lily's lips trembled. "My mom, she fell. She won't wake up. Please, someone has to help her." A couple of people paused, startled by the urgency in her voice. The receptionist stood quickly, concern etching her face. "Where is she? Tell me where your mom is." But Lily stepped back. Fear, confusion, the weight of panic, it all tangled inside her again. She shook her head, tears spilling over. And then she ran. Out the door, down the steps, back onto the sidewalk. She didn't know where she was going anymore. She only knew she couldn't stop. Her small footsteps echoed down the street, carrying her closer inch by inch to the man who would change both their lives. They had crossed paths twice already. Neither knew it. But the third time would not be by accident. And it would happen very soon. By late morning, Asheville bustled with its usual rhythm traffic humming along, shop doors propped open, the scent of roasted coffee drifting from street corners. Everett, having finished his quiet stop at the cafe, walked back toward his car with a sense of unease he still couldn't place. The day felt off balance, as though something waited just beyond the next turn. He stepped into the driver's seat, rested his hands on the wheel, and inhaled deeply. The restlessness had only grown stronger. He glanced out the window toward the street, watching people pass by, shoppers with bags, a young couple holding hands, a delivery worker unloading boxes. Ordinary scenes, yet Everett felt strangely out of sync with them. He started the engine but didn't pull away. Something held him there. Just a few blocks away, Lily was slowing down. Her legs ached, her throat hurt, and her breath came sharp and uneven. She stumbled to a stop near a small fountain in the center of Pack Square and pressed her palms against her knees, trying not to cry again. She couldn't go home. She couldn't leave her mother alone. She couldn't stop looking for help, no matter how scared she was. A group of teenagers walked past her without noticing. A businessman hurried by, glancing at his watch. Lily stood alone among the footsteps and voices, overwhelmed by the noise and movement. Her vision blurred with fresh tears. Then she caught sight of something familiar, a car she had seen earlier. She didn't know the man inside, but she remembered how he had paused at the cafe, how he had looked like someone who might listen. She didn't know why she felt it. She only felt it. With a trembling breath, she wiped her face on her sleeve and stepped off the curb. Everett, about to shift the car into drive, noticed movement in front of him. A small figure running toward him fast, desperate. He hit the brake. Startled, the girl stopped, right beside his car door. Her face was flushed from running, her cheeks streaked with tears. Her backpack hung crookedly, one strap dragging. She stared up at him through wide, frightened eyes. Everett froze. For one long moment, neither moved. Then Lily lifted a shaking hand and knocked once, just once, on his car window. A soft, fragile tap that carried far more weight than the sound itself. Everett's chest tightened. Without thinking, he opened the door. The little girl stepped back half a pace, but didn't run this time. Her lips parted, her breath trembling. "Mister," she whispered, trying not to cry, "please, I need help." Her voice cracked. Everett knelt down to meet her eye level, instinct taking over before thought. "Hey," he said gently, the softness of his own voice surprising him. "You're all right. Tell me what's wrong." Lily's small hands twisted together. Words fought their way out through sobs. "My mom. She fell. She won't wake up. I tried to find someone. No one listened. Please, please help her." Her knees buckled, and she grabbed onto his sleeve to steady herself, fingers clutching him the same way she had clung to the counter in the flower shop earlier that morning. Everett caught her before she could fall. It hit him then, a sharp, unmistakable pull deep in his chest. A child's fear, a child's trust. A child, depending on him. He hadn't felt anything like it in years. "Where is she?" he asked, steady and calm. "Can you show me?" Lily nodded frantically, wiping her wet cheeks with the back of her hand. "At our shop, please hurry." Everett stood and opened the passenger door. "Get in. I'll get you there." Lily hesitated only a second before climbing in, hugging her backpack tightly. Everett buckled her seatbelt, then shut the door and raced around to the driver's side. He had no idea where the flower shop was. He had no idea what he would find. But as he pulled into traffic faster than he'd driven in years, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This little girl was no longer a stranger. She was a responsibility, his responsibility now. And whatever waited for them at the shop would change everything. Everett drove faster than he had in years, his hands steady on the wheel, yet his heart pounding with an unfamiliar urgency. Beside him, Lily sat stiff and silent, her small fingers gripping her backpack with white-knuckled tension. Every few seconds, her breath hitched, and she wiped at her cheeks even though new tears kept falling. "It's okay," Everett said quietly, eyes on the road. "We'll get there. You're doing really well." She nodded, but her lips trembled. "Please hurry." He pressed a little harder on the accelerator. Traffic thinned as they turned off the main street and onto a quieter road lined with small local shops, bakeries, a tailor, a used bookstore with a hand-painted sign. Lily pointed ahead with a shaking hand. "There. It's there." Everett spotted the storefront immediately. Heart and petals. The letters painted in soft green, surrounded by hand-painted vines and tiny blossoms. The door was closed, but the lights were still on inside. He parked abruptly, not caring about the angle, and hurried out. Lily scrambled out behind him before he could help her, rushing toward the door with quick, stumbling steps. Everett caught up and pushed the door open. The bell above it chimed too bright, too normal for what waited inside. The shop was filled with the gentle scent of roses and eucalyptus, but the peaceful atmosphere made the scene on the floor all the more jarring. Grace Hart lay collapsed behind the counter, her body curled slightly as though she had tried to brace herself in the last moments before losing consciousness. One hand rested limply near a fallen stack of ribbon spools. Her dark hair fanned across the floor, and her skin had taken on a frightening pallor. Lily ran to her immediately. "Mom!" she cried, dropping to her knees. "Mom! Wake up! Please wake up!" She shook Grace's shoulder gently, but there was no response. Everett felt the air leave his lungs. For a moment he stood frozen, his mind flashing back years back, to another moment, another person, another day when someone he cared for had fallen and he'd been powerless to stop it. The memory hit like a blow, sharp and unwelcome. But this time, he refused to stand still. He moved quickly around the counter and knelt beside Grace, checking her pulse with a steady hand. It was faint, too faint, but present. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. "But there, she's alive," Everett said gently, looking at Lily. "She's breathing. We need an ambulance, sweetheart." I tried to get someone. I didn't know what to do." Lily sobbed, burying her face against her mother's shoulder. Everett touched her back lightly, reassuringly. "You did the right thing. You came to find help. You did exactly what you should." She nodded, though her tears didn't slow. Everett pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice remained calm as he gave the dispatcher the address and described the scene. But inside, something was unraveling, old walls cracking under the weight of responsibility he hadn't expected to feel again. The dispatcher promised help was on the way. Lily pressed her forehead to her mother's arm. "Mom, please don't leave me." The word struck Everett deeply, reverberating through memories he kept tightly guarded. He swallowed hard and forced his voice steady. "Lily," he said softly, "can you sit beside me while we wait? You're not alone." She looked up, eyes wide and wet, and scooted closer to him, leaning against his arm as though anchoring herself. Everett placed a steady hand on her shoulder. It felt natural, more natural than he expected. Minutes passed, though they felt much longer. Then sirens approached, growing louder until flashing lights washed through the shop windows. Paramedics burst through the door with calm, practiced efficiency. They moved to Grace immediately, checking vitals, asking quick questions. Everett answered what Lily couldn't, explaining how he found them, what had happened, how long she'd been unconscious. One paramedic looked up. "We need to take her now. She's stable but needs immediate care." Lily stood abruptly. "I'm going with her," Everett rose as well, instinct guiding him. She's not going alone. The paramedic nodded. Only one person can ride in the ambulance. Someone else will need to follow. Lily clung to Everett's hand without hesitation. He squeezed back gently. You ride with your mom. I'll be right behind you the whole way, okay? She looked up at him, searching, trusting, scared, and nodded. As the paramedics lifted Grace onto the stretcher and wheeled her out, Lily hurried beside them. Everett followed close behind, stepping into the sunlight that now felt too bright, too sharp. The ambulance doors closed. Lily climbed inside with one of the medics. Everett hurried to his car, his pulse pounding. He didn't know why this mattered so much. He didn't understand why he felt so responsible. All he knew was this: he wasn't going to let that little girl face the rest of this day alone. He started the engine and followed the ambulance toward the hospital, toward a moment that would alter the course of his life far more than he realized. The second morning began quietly at Willow Harbor Hospital. A pale light slipped through the blinds as Everett stepped out of the elevator, still wearing yesterday's jacket. He had stopped at the nurse's station to ask how Grace was doing. She's stable, the nurse said softly. Still very weak, but stable. She might wake for a few minutes at a time. It was more realistic, and Everett felt a measured relief wash over him. When he entered the room, he found Lily curled beside her mother's arm, fast asleep. Grace lay still, her breathing shallow but steady. A small oxygen tube rested beneath her nose. Everett set a warm cup of cocoa on the table and knelt down beside Lily. You must have been up all night, he whispered. Lily blinked awake and rubbed her eyes. I wanted to stay with her. The doctor said she was sleepy because her body is trying to fix itself. That's right, Everett said gently. Grace stirred slightly but didn't wake. Her hand twitched once, then relaxed again. Lily watched her closely, then looked at Everett with a fragile hope. Do you think she knows I'm here? I'm sure she does, he said, smoothing the blanket near Grace's arm. Everett stepped outside for a moment to call Caleb. Hey, I need a couple more days, Everett said quietly. Caleb didn't hesitate. Take the time you need. Everything's covered here. Thanks, Everett murmured. When he returned, Lily was coloring at the window. Everett joined her, helping pick out crayons, keeping the room calm and steady. Every so often he checked on Grace, watching the rise and fall of her breath. At midday, the attending physician entered. Her vitals are improving, he said gently. But she'll need several days before she's strong enough to go home. You should prepare Lily for that, Everett nodded. We'll take it one day at a time. Lily leaned against him, trusting his reassurance as if he had always been part of their lives. And Everett, strangely, wanted to live up to that trust. Later that afternoon, the room fell into a soft stillness. Lily drew quietly by the bed, humming under her breath. Everett sat in the corner chair, reading the notes left by the doctor, trying to understand what recovery would look like for Grace. Then Grace's fingers moved again, more noticeably this time. Lily froze. Mom? Everett stepped closer. Grace's eyelids fluttered, and she opened her eyes halfway. She looked dazed, unfocused at first, breathing slowly as she tried to orient herself. Mom, you're awake, Lily whispered, unable to hold back her relief. Grace shifted weakly, her voice barely audible. Hey, sweetheart. Lily leaned over carefully, holding her mother's hand. I missed you. Grace touched Lily's cheek with trembling fingers. I missed you too. She glanced toward Everett, recognizing him through the haze. You came back. End of 20. Everett kept his voice soft so she wouldn't strain. I said I would. Grace's eyes closed again for a moment, exhausted from just waking. The doctor's warning echoed in Everett's mind, short periods awake, long periods asleep. But Grace opened her eyes once more. Thank you for staying with her. You don't need to thank me, Everett said. Lily was very brave. Grace managed a faint smile before her energy faded and her head rested back against the pillow. The nurse checked on her and nodded approvingly. This is good progress. Small, but good. Lily curled beside her mother, resting her head lightly on the edge of the bed. She's getting better, right? Yes, Everett said. But slowly. And we'll be here the whole time. Grace slept again, but the tension in the room had eased. Lily felt it too, her shoulders relaxing as she drifted into a gentle nap next to her mother. Everett stood by the window, watching the two of them breathe in unison. Something settled quietly inside him. Not urgency, not fear, just a steady promise. He would stay as long as they needed him. The afternoon sun slanted through the narrow hospital window, casting long stripes of warm light across the room. Everett sat in the chair beside Grace's bed, hands folded loosely, eyes quiet but alert. He wasn't used to sitting still or waiting. His life was built on planning, moving, deciding. But here, in this small room filled with soft beeps and the gentle sound of Lily whispering to her mother, the stillness felt different, necessary even. Lily had drifted into a light sleep curled in the armchair, her head resting awkwardly against the side. Everett noticed her chin dipping lower and gently adjusted a folded blanket under her cheek. She didn't wake, but her breathing softened, the tension easing from her small shoulders. He studied her for a moment, running through the city alone, searching for help, refusing to give up. That kind of courage didn't come from nowhere. She had that strength because someone had given it to her, someone who was now lying quietly in the hospital bed beside them. Grace. Everett glanced at her. Her breathing remained steady, though slow, and a soft color was beginning to return to her cheeks. The oxygen tube sat lightly across her face. Her dark hair was fanned over the pillow, a contrast to the crisp white sheets. She looked peaceful, fragile, and yet he could sense an underlying resilience, like someone who had held her life together with tired hands for far too long. A quiet knock sounded on the door. Everett turned as a nurse stepped inside with a chart. "Hi there," she whispered. "Just checking vitals." He nodded and stepped back so she could work. The nurse smiled at Everett as she checked Grace's pulse. "You're the friend who brought her daughter in?" Everett hesitated a fraction of a second before responding. "I helped her, yes." "You did more than help," the nurse said kindly. "Most people don't step into situations like this." Everett didn't know how to answer that. She didn't expect him to. She gave Lily a fond look and left them with the room's quiet again. Everett returned to his seat. He let his gaze settle on Grace once more. He didn't know her, not truly. And yet something about her condition tugged at him like an echo of a memory he had tried to bury years ago. He closed his eyes. But before the memory could fully form, a small voice stirred him. "Mr. Everett?" Lily blinked up at him sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "I'm here," he said gently. She sat up a little straighter, glancing nervously toward the bed. "Is she still okay?" "Yes," Everett said. "The nurse just checked. She's holding steady." Lily exhaled, shoulders dropping. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." "You needed rest," Everett replied. "You've been very brave." Lily stared at him for a moment, then whispered, "I was so scared." He nodded slowly. "Anyone would be. But you didn't freeze. You didn't run home. You kept going until someone listened. That matters." She looked down at her hands. "People think kids don't know things, but I could tell." Her voice softened. "I knew Mom wasn't okay." Everett's chest tightened. "You did exactly what she needed." They sat quietly for a moment, the warmth between them growing not loud or dramatic, but steady and quiet, the way new trust often begins. A doctor stepped into the room then, scanning Grace's chart as he approached. "Lily?" he asked kindly. Lily stood up quickly. "I'm Dr. Patterson. I saw you earlier." He smiled reassuringly at her. "Your mom is stable. We're running more tests to understand why she fainted, but her heart rate looks better, and she's responding to treatment." Lily touched the side of the bed lightly. "When will she wake up?" "Soon, I hope," the doctor said. "Her body is resting. It's been under more stress than she's been showing." Lily looked worried again. "Is it my fault? She works a lot. Because of me." Everett stepped forward gently. "Hey now," he said softly. "Not one bit of this is your fault." Dr. Patterson nodded firmly. "Your mom's condition was building for some time. This didn't happen because of anything you did. She loves you very much." Lily's eyes grew glossy, but she nodded. The doctor looked at Everett next. "Are you family?" The question lingered longer than Everett expected. Lily quickly stepped closer to him. "He helped me. He didn't leave." Dr. Patterson smiled. "Well, thank you. She's lucky to have someone here for her." Everett offered a quiet nod. "We'll stay as long as she needs." The doctor left, and the room fell silent again. Outside the window, the day was shifting toward late afternoon. Long rays of light stretched across the mountain ridges, painting the sky in muted gold. Lily sat on the edge of the chair again, her voice small. When she wakes up, do you think she'll be scared? Everett took the seat beside her. She'll see you first, and that will make her feel safe. Lily leaned slightly against him this time without fear, just trust. Everett didn't pull away. Deep down, he knew this moment mattered more than he could explain, and though he couldn't yet see the path ahead, he sensed this was the beginning of something that would change all of their lives. The room had grown quiet by late afternoon, sunlight warming the edge of the window as Lily rested beside her mother. Everett stayed close, watching both of them with a steady concern he didn't fully understand. Then, Grace moved. It was small, just her fingers shifting beneath Lily's hand, but it was enough. Lily jerked upright. "Mom?" Grace's eyes fluttered open. She looked confused at first, then found her daughter's face. "Lily?" Lily burst into quiet tears and leaned over the bed. "I was so scared you wouldn't wake up." Grace lifted a weak hand to her daughter's cheek. "I'm here, sweetheart." Everett stepped back to give them space, but Grace's gaze eventually drifted to him. She studied him, taking in the unfamiliar man standing protectively near her daughter. "Thank you," she whispered. Everett shook his head gently. "Your daughter found me. She did everything." Lily sniffed and rested her head on her mother's arm. The nurse entered to check vitals, smiling broadly. "Good to see you awake. You're stable, but you'll need rest." Grace nodded weakly. When the nurse left, Lily turned to Everett. "Can you stay just a little longer?" Everett's answer came without hesitation. "Of course." Grace watched the two of them, Lily leaning toward Everett with instinctive trust, Everett adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Something softened in her expression, exhaustion fading into relief. "Were you with her the whole time?" Grace asked quietly. "Yes," Everett said. She wasn't alone. Tears filled Grace's eyes, not from fear this time, but gratitude too deep to express. Lily soon drifted to sleep, still holding her mother's hand. Everett pulled the blanket higher around her and sat again, the room settling into a peaceful hush. "You're very kind," Grace murmured. Everett looked at her for a long moment. "I'm just glad she's safe." Grace closed her eyes, comforted. Everett watched over them both, feeling something shift inside him, something warm, unfamiliar, and impossible to ignore. And as evening settled outside the window, he knew one thing with quiet certainty. He would return in the morning, no matter what. The next morning came gently, with soft light peeking through the hospital blinds. Everett arrived earlier than he meant to, coffee in one hand and a quiet hopefulness he didn't try to explain. Nurses passed him with warm nods. By now, everyone recognized him as the gentleman who stayed with the little girl. When he stepped into Grace's room, he found Lily perched at the edge of the bed, swinging her feet lightly. Grace was awake, her color better, though still tired. Both of them looked up the moment Everett walked in. Lily brightened instantly. "You came back." Everett smiled. "I said I would." Grace tried pushing herself up, but he gestured for her to stay relaxed. "No rush," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Grace gave a small, grateful smile. "Like, I've been through a blender, but better than yesterday. The doctors say I should be able to go home in a couple of days." "That's good news," Everett said. He handed the coffee cup toward her. "Is just plain with a little cream. I wasn't sure what you liked." Grace laughed quietly. "It's perfect." Lily scooted closer to Everett. "Mom said I can show you something." She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket, carefully flattening it. It was a drawing, Grace lying in bed, Lily beside her, and Everett standing watch near the door, drawn with careful crayon strokes. Everett swallowed gently. "You made this?" Lily nodded proudly. "You look like you were protecting us." Grace glanced at him with soft gratitude, the kind that settled in the room like warmth. He cleared his throat. "Well, I think I was just doing what anyone would." Grace shook her head gently. "Not everyone would. Not anymore." A nurse peeked in to check Grace's vitals. Lily climbed off the bed to give space, and Everett helped her gather her crayons. Everything felt easy, natural, in a way Everett hadn't felt in years. When the nurse left, Everett turned to Grace. "Do you have someone who can help when you get home? Friends? Family?" Grace hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We've been on our own for a while. Well, I don't really have anyone nearby. Lily looked up at Everett in quiet hope, as if waiting for him to say exactly what she wanted to hear. Everett paused. He had a meeting at 11, a stack of reports waiting on his desk, a life structured down to the minute. But looking at Grace and Lily, none of it felt as important as it did 2 days ago. "If you need help," he said softly, "I'm around." Grace's eyes warmed. Lily smiled so brightly the whole room seemed lighter. For the first time in years, Everett felt less like a visitor in his own life, and more like someone finally walking toward something real. By late afternoon, Grace had grown tired, drifting in and out of sleep. Lily colored quietly at the small table near the window, humming to herself. Everett stayed beside them, feeling strangely at peace in the stillness of the room. When Grace woke again, the sky outside had shifted to a gentle gold. She watched Everett for a moment before speaking. "You've done a lot for us," she said softly. "More than anyone has in a long time." Everett shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Grace studied him, her voice low but steady. "Maybe not, but I'd like to understand why you stayed." He didn't answer right away. The truth felt too exposed, too personal. So many years of keeping distance, of choosing work over people, and yet, here he was, rearranging his whole day for two strangers. "I don't know," he finally said, "but it felt like the right place to be." Grace's eyes softened. "Well, we're grateful." Before Everett could respond, a quiet knock came at the door. A social worker stepped in with a clipboard in hand, polite smile, practiced tone. "Miss Harper," she said gently, "once you're discharged, we'll need to discuss your recovery support. It looks like you live alone with your daughter, and—" Grace tensed. "We'll manage." The social worker glanced at Lily, then at the medical notes. "It's standard procedure. We just want to make sure you both have what you need." Lily's coloring stopped. Her eyes flickered toward Everett, a mix of caution and something like fear. Everett stepped forward, his voice steady. "They're not alone." The social worker turned to him. "And you are." Grace opened her mouth, but Everett answered first, gentle and sure. "A friend," he said. "Someone they can count on." That shifted the room. Grace looked at him with quiet surprise, Lily with relief. The social worker nodded, making a note. "That's good to hear. We'll talk more tomorrow." When she left, the silence changed. Not uncomfortable, but full of things unspoken. Lily climbed onto the bed beside her mother. "Can he still come tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small. Grace brushed her daughter's hair back. "If he wants to." Everett felt the weight of the moment. A simple choice, yet one that stirred something deep, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. "I'll be here," he said softly. Grace held his gaze a little longer this time. Then, "We'll see you in the morning." Everett nodded, stepping toward the door. The hallway lights glowed warm, casting a soft path ahead of him. But before he left entirely, a thought struck him, quiet but certain. He didn't want this to end at the hospital. And for the first time in a long while, the possibility of belonging somewhere didn't scare him. It felt like hope. 2 days later, Grace was cleared for discharge. The morning air outside the hospital was crisp, carrying the quiet hum of a small-town weekday. Everett stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets, waiting with a steadiness that surprised even him. When Grace stepped out in the wheelchair, the nurse insisted on, Lily clutching her backpack beside her. Everett's expression softened. "You look ready to be home," he said. Grace offered a tired smile. "More ready than I expected." Lily ran ahead and wrapped her arms around Everett's waist. "We saved you a seat in the car." Everett chuckled, gently patting her shoulder. "Is that so?" A hospital volunteer guided Grace closer, while Everett retrieved her small duffel bag. Everything felt natural, as if this wasn't the first time they'd navigated something together. When he opened the passenger door of his car, Grace hesitated. "You don't have to drive us," she said quietly. "A cab would have been fine." I know," Everett replied, "but I wanted to." Something in her expression eased, and she stepped inside. The drive to Willow Harbor was calm, passing rows of modest homes and old trees beginning to show hints of spring. Lily chatted softly in the back seat, telling Everett about her favorite books and the stray cat that lived behind their building. Grace listened, occasionally glancing at Everett, studying him the way people study a stranger who suddenly feels familiar. When they reached her apartment building, Everett helped carry her things upstairs. The place was small but homey, warm light filtering through the curtains. A few family photos, children's drawings, signs of a life built carefully. Piece by piece, Grace sat carefully on the couch while Lily rushed to open the curtains. "See? I told you it's brighter in the morning." Everett smiled. "It's a good place." Grace nodded. "It's ours. Not much, but it's been home. And place." He placed her bag near the table. "Is there anything you need before I head out? Groceries? Prescriptions?" Grace hesitated long enough for him to realize she was weighing more than a simple errand. "Everett," she said quietly, "why are you doing all this?" He paused, caught off guard but not unprepared. "Because you needed help. And because he exhaled slowly. "Because it feels right to stay." Grace looked down at her hands, then back up, her voice soft. "It's been a long time since someone chose to stay." Before Everett could reply, Lily ran up holding a small framed photo. "Mom, show him." Grace startled slightly but managed a gentle smile. "It's nothing, honey." But Lily pressed it into Everett's hands. The picture showed Lily younger, maybe 5, standing beside a woman who wasn't Grace. Same eyes, same smile. Everett's heartbeat stumbled. "This was my aunt," Lily explained proudly. "Mom said she helped raise me. She passed away last year." Grace watched Everett closely, almost anxiously, as he studied the photo. He handed it back with a quiet steadiness. "She looked like someone with a big heart." Lily nodded. "She really did." Grace exhaled relief, gratitude, something unspoken threading between them. But before the room settled, someone knocked at the door. A firm, unfamiliar knock. Grace stiffened immediately. Everett instinctively stepped closer to her and Lily. The knock came again, slower this time, but unmistakably deliberate. Lily whispered, "Mom, who is it?" Grace didn't answer, and Everett understood that whatever waited behind that door would decide what came next. The knock echoed through the small apartment a third time, steady, patient, but heavy enough to raise every quiet worry Grace had been trying to bury. Everett stepped forward without thinking, positioning himself between the door and the 2 people behind him. "Stay close," he murmured. Grace nodded, her hand gently resting on Lily's shoulder. Everett opened the door. Standing in the hallway was Mrs. Callahan, the elderly landlord of the building. Her white cardigan was buttoned crookedly, her hair gathered in a loose bun. She held a folder pressed against her chest. "Oh, Grace," she said softly, "I'm sorry to come by unannounced." Grace relaxed a little, but Everett felt the tension still in her voice. "Is something wrong?" Mrs. Callahan looked past Everett into the apartment. "The hospital told us what happened. I just wanted to check on you and give you these." She offered the folder. Grace opened it slowly, letters, small notes, a few grocery receipts, familiar handwriting. Grace inhaled sharply. "These were from my sister," she whispered. "I thought they were lost." Mrs. Callahan nodded. "I kept them safe after she passed. I wasn't sure when to give them to you. But after hearing what happened, I thought maybe you could use a reminder that you're not alone." Grace covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Everett stepped aside so the landlord could enter. Lily hugged the older woman with quiet affection, and Mrs. Callahan patted her back gently. "Your mama's a strong one," she murmured. When she left, closing the door softly behind her, the apartment felt different, warmer somehow, as if someone had lit a small lamp inside a dark memory. Grace wiped her eyes. "She and my sister were close. Those letters, they're the last pieces I have left of her." Everett sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt his presence. "You have more strength than you give yourself credit for." Grace shook her head gently. "I've been holding everything together with tape and prayers. And then you showed up. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Everett said quietly. "I didn't do any of this expecting something back." Lily crawled onto the couch between them, leaning against both of their arms. "Can we all stay friends?" she asked, her voice hopeful, fragile. Grace smiled through her tears. I think we already are. Everett looked at Lily, then at Grace, a long, steady look that held everything he didn't say aloud. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the small heater and the rustle of Lily settling in. For the first time in years, Everett didn't feel like he was standing at the edge of someone else's life. He felt invited in. Grace rested her head against the couch cushion. You know, my sister always told me good people show up when you least expect it. Everett nodded slowly. Maybe she was right. Lily yawned, curling closer to the two of them. Are we gonna be okay now? Grace smoothed her daughter's hair. Yes, sweetheart. We're gonna be okay. Everett watched them with a gentleness he had forgotten he could feel. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched across the buildings, soft and golden. And somewhere in his chest, a place long closed, long quiet, something warm finally settled. A beginning. Not dramatic, not rushed, just real. And for all three of them, it was enough. In the quiet, after everything settled, you could almost picture the three of them sitting by a small kitchen table, sunlight drifting across the worn wood, the kind of morning that feels like a fresh breath after a long storm. Everett, once a man who walked through life with his heart locked away, found himself gently folded into a home he never expected. And Grace, with Lily curled against her side, discovered that healing sometimes arrives not through grand gestures, but through the steady presence of someone who chooses to stay. If this story touched you even a little, press 1 inch the comments, and if it didn't, or you'd like to see something different, press 0. Love, redemption, and the fragile work of building a new home, these are the threads holding this tale together. It reminds us that kindness can quietly reroute a life, that every soul deserves a place where they are seen and loved, and that family is often less about blood and more about the people who refuse to walk away. Like a porch light left on during a long night, one small act of goodness can guide us safely through the darkest roads. And maybe, just maybe, offering someone a second chance is how we find our own. So tonight, as you finish your cup of tea or sit by your living room window watching the evening settle over your neighborhood, take a moment to think about the people who have walked beside you gently, consistently, without asking for anything in return. Stories like this remind us of the power of choosing one another. And if this journey found a place in your heart, I hope you'll stay a while longer and join us for the next one.